Have you ever stopped to wonder why your life is measured the way it is? I mean, who decided that? Well, the answer comes from a civilization that literally built the blueprint for our modern world, and then vanished so completely that for 4,000 years, nobody even knew they existed. All right, let's get into it. Think about this number for a second. 60. Every single hour of your life has 60 minutes. Every minute has 60 seconds. You didn't choose that. I didn't choose that. Nope. Somebody chose it for us about 5,000 years ago. So, who were they?
They were the Sumerians, the people who gave us the 60-second minute, the 24-hour day, the 360-degree circle, and that's not even the half of it. They also invented the first wheel, the first writing, the first laws. It's kind of wild when you think about it. We are all living inside a world running on an operating system that they designed thousands and thousands of years ago. Now, to really understand the Sumerians, you first have to understand the land that made them, a place called southern Mesopotamia. And by pretty much every measure, this place should have been impossible to live in. It was this incredibly tough reality that forced them to become some of the most innovative people on the planet. Their home was a land of just crazy paradoxes. On one hand, you've got this sun-scorched flat plain, almost no rain, and these totally unpredictable, catastrophic floods. They had no stone, no forests, no metal. But, and this is a huge but, on the other hand, the rivers left behind this incredibly rich, fertile silt. So the potential for abundance was there, but only if, and this was the catch, only if they could somehow master the water. That constant threat of floods was so deep in their minds, it became their central myth. They told this story about a great flood sent by the gods to just wipe out humanity, where only one guy, Utnapishtim, survives by building a boat. Now, does that sound familiar? It should. This story, first written down by the Sumerians, is the direct ancestor, the original blueprint for the story of Noah's Ark. That's how much their environment shaped their entire worldview.
So here's the crucial point. For them, civilization wasn't some grand ambition, it was pure survival. See, to control the water, you couldn't just work as a family or a small village. No way. You needed to get thousands of people working together to build and maintain these huge canal systems. And that need, right there, was the hidden engine that sparked the birth of cities.
And right at the heart of this new way of organizing people stood the ziggurat. This was not just a temple. Think of it as the city's command center. The priests who ran the place, they managed everything. The land, the water, the extra grain, the work schedules. It was basically the world's first central government, and it was born out of the need to manage irrigation.
Living all together like this was a total game changer. I mean, it was completely new. In a village, you know everybody, right? Your reputation is everything. But in a massive city like Uruk, you're surrounded by tens of thousands of strangers. Social order just couldn't work based on who you knew anymore. It needed institutions. And what do institutions need? They need records. And this need for records led directly to one of the biggest inventions in human history, writing. And get this, it wasn't invented for poetry or history. It was invented for accounting. It started with these simple little clay tokens for things like grain or sheep. Then someone had a brilliant idea. Instead of keeping all these tokens, why not just press their shapes into a clay tablet? And boom, you have pictograms. But the final leap, the real genius move, was realizing these symbols could represent sounds, not just things. With that, cuneiform was born, and for the first time ever, the full complexity of human speech could be captured in clay.
Once they had writing, it's like a dam of creativity just burst open. The Sumerians didn't just invent a few useful things. It feels like they invented pretty much everything that our world is built on. The sheer scale of it is just staggering.
I mean, just look at this list. The plow, which completely changed farming forever. The wheel and axle. The sailboat, turning rivers into superhighways. In architecture, they give us arches and columns. They wrote the first legal codes, started the first schools. They even figured out what we call the Pythagorean theorem more than 1,000 years before Pythagoras was even born. It's just incredible.
And, oh yeah, they also invented beer. And it wasn't just for parties. It was a staple of their diet, probably a lot safer to drink than a local water. They loved it so much they actually had a goddess of beer, Kaise, and they wrote this beautiful hymn to her that is essentially the world's oldest beer recipe.
But, you know, it wasn't all just brilliant inventions in beer. The Sumerians had a really complex society with some very different ideas about life, sickness, and death. So let's take a look at the more human side of this forgotten world.
So, if you got sick in ancient Sumer, two specialists showed up. First was the asu, who was like a physician. He'd check you out and prescribe things like herbal remedies. But at the same time, you had the ashipu, who was basically an exorcist. His job was to figure out the spiritual cause, like which angry god or demon was responsible. To us, that might seem strange, but to them it made perfect sense. You had to treat both the body and the soul to get better. Their view of the boundary between life and death, well, it could also get pretty chilling, especially when it came to their rulers. See, in their view, a king didn't just die. He crossed over to the next world. And he was not going alone. Back in the 1920s, archaeologists exploring the ancient city of Ur found something astonishing: the royal cemetery. In one tomb, which they called the Great Death Pit, they found the body of a queen, and she was surrounded by her entire court, 74 people, soldiers, musicians, ladies-in-waiting, all buried with her. For a long time, the thinking was that they all willingly drank poison, as a final act of loyalty. But recent scientific scans of the skulls, they tell a much darker story. They found fractures caused by a blunt instrument that happened right before death. It seems that for anyone who didn't die from the poison quickly enough, their passage was, well, it was assisted.
But amidst all this brutality, Sumerian society was also capable of incredible sophistication. And out of it comes the birth of, well, the individual voice. Her name was Enheduanna. She was the daughter of a great emperor, and he made her the high priestess of Ur. But her real power wasn't religious, it was in her words. She is the first person in all of recorded history to sign her name to her work, the world's first author.
And what she wrote was absolutely revolutionary. When she was forced into political exile, she didn't write some dry state record. She wrote about her own fear, her suffering, her anger. For the first time, this isn't a government report or a list of goods. This is a person, an individual consciousness pouring itself out onto a clay tablet. This is the birth of the I in literature.
Okay, so you have this unbelievably foundational civilization. How do they just disappear? How are they so completely forgotten that the world just moved on without them for 4 millennia? Well, their political power basically fell apart around 2004 BC when the city of Ur was destroyed. Their culture was just sort of absorbed by other empires, and their language became a dead one, kind of like Latin. And then there was just silence. A 4,000-year silence until archaeologists in the 1800s started digging their clay tablets out of the desert sand.
And the biggest reason for their disappearance is surprisingly simple. It's all about what they built with. The Egyptians built with stone, the Greeks used marble. Their monuments are kind of hard to miss. But the Sumerians, they built with mud brick. And over the centuries, their magnificent cities and temples and ziggurats simply crumbled and dissolved right back into the dirt, vanishing from sight and from memory.
And that really brings us full circle, doesn't it? For 4,000 years, humanity has been living inside a house that the Sumerians built. We've been using their tools, telling their stories, measuring our lives by their clocks, all without having a clue who our architects were. In the end, I think the Sumerians proved something really profound. The most enduring legacy isn't built from stone, and it's not won by armies. They conquered the future with their ideas, the 60-second minute, the wheel, the written word. And ideas, unlike empires, do not fall. They just become the foundation that everyone else builds on.